I do find it funny that these people, right, they claim to be so heterodox, right? They claim to be so different. They claim to be so intellectually just kind of like apart from everybody else. And yet, when you look at, the basic function of intellectual, which is like you got to do some writing, it's all this like totally like crass, silly. We got to just imitate one another, right? So on Twitter, it's, hey, I wrote a thing. Here, it's this totally generic hack like, why I used to suck, and hopefully no longer do. Even this kind of like little caveat here, right? Very deferential, very apologetic, very dorky, very silly. He's exactly the same way, right? He does not have the kind of intellectual chops that he thinks. I warned you about Richard Hanania or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. I warned you guys about him because as soon as he started posting stuff about either race and IQ, specific commentary on folks like Jordan Neely, who was choked to death on a New York City subway, his commentary on so-called like anti-white pogroms in inner cities. I knew right away that there's just something like really pathological about this guy, like just totally not normal. Hanania is now on this apology tour because he got caught in typical low IQ fashion using his like I think it was not only his like university email address but his personal email addresses as well. About a week ago or so, there was this HuffPost piece about him. He's now calling it a hit piece, which I don't quite understand why, because he is doing the apology, so it can't really be a hit piece, right? It's an accurate assessment of his beliefs. And when all this got tied back to him, it revealed that he was posting under this name Richard Host or Hosty. Also don't know how to pronounce that either. And it was actually like in some pretty like serious like total like right-wing extremist blogs and websites. We're talking about like actual like neo-Nazi groups affiliated with websites that do everything from like, I don't know, argue for eugenics in the sense of like sterilizing low IQ people, argue for race wars, argue the idea that the Holocaust never actually happened, that kind of stuff. So like really extreme stuff. And he made many of the same arguments. I don't think he actually said anything about Jews from what I recall. Maybe he's actually also Jewish himself. I'm not sure. He'd said, a ton of like misogynistic stuff about women should have never been allowed to be in politics. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to vote. All right, they need to serve men, that kind of thing. Clearly, just kind of like fear-driven narratives about black men, other races, right? He's talking about racial hierarchy, superior, inferior. When he posted this, I remember the title was something like "Why I Used to Suck and Hopefully No Longer Do," and I put this into DuckDuckGo, and I typed in Hanania used to suck, and the like all these like images came up. They seem like pornographic images because they're pixelated now. Let's just go through the apology and see what this dork has to say. So first of all, the interesting part is the title and the way that he phrased it on Twitter. So on Twitter it was something like, hey, I wrote something, or I wrote a thing. You know, that like that very common like non like liberal nonprofits or whatever, or these other kind of workplaces. It's all people that talk that way, right? Journalistic offices. It's all people that talk that way. And he's just kind of, again, in manicured fashion. I do find it funny that these people, right, they claim to be so heterodox, right? They claim to be so different. They claim to be so intellectually just kind of like apart from everybody else. And yet, when you look at, the basic function of intellectual, which is like you got to do some writing, it's all this like totally like crass, silly. We got to just imitate one another, right? So on Twitter, it's, hey, I wrote a thing. Here, it's this totally generic hack like, why I used to suck, and hopefully no longer do. Even this kind of like little caveat here, right? Very deferential, very apologetic, very dorky, very silly, right? He's exactly the same way, right? He does not have the kind of intellectual chops that he thinks. And we're going to get into some of those specifics as well. But let's actually read what he has to say and just go through it line by line, because I find this a fascinating portrait of somebody who not only was going through so many various pathologies, but is clearly very much still in the throes of it. So he begins by saying the following: every story of how an individual came to their political and social views has both a psychological and intellectual component. Recently, it's been revealed that over a decade ago, I held many beliefs that, as my current writing makes clear, I now find repulsive. Total lie. He does not find that stuff repulsive at all. Again, just look at the kind of comments that he would make about people like Jordan Neely. When Jordan Neely, who is a homeless person who was black, and dealing with, clearly like a mental episode, not just in that situation, but for 10 years up until that point. You see people on Reddit talking about the Michael Jackson impersonator who used to be normal and fun back in the late 2000s. Back in 2013, right? 2013 to 2023, 10 whole years. Nobody coming to his aid. Nobody, not family, not the state, right? You see all these kind of like journalistic pieces coming out, from people that work in mental health or whatever in New York City, saying stuff like, oh, I wonder how he slipped through the cracks. It's like, well, you know exactly how. He had no address. That's how he slipped through the cracks. But instead of having this kind of empathy for that situation, and sort of understanding that you need to, have like a structural kind of approach to all this, Hanania or Hanania was just kind of like, the fact that this guy got killed, right? It really is like a service, right, to the city. That's the way that he was phrasing it. And it's just full of these kinds of little telltale details again and again. So I totally do not believe that he finds any of that repulsive at all. He just simply got discovered, and he knew, right, kind of like from the very beginning, like if he wants to have a career, he needs to at the very least have a more presentable kind of appearance, right, when it comes to getting a PhD, when it comes to going on television, when it comes to his own writing. There's a certain line that he could push, but he can't push too far. So that's one lie. Another thing is that, very uncomfortable with this kind of phrasing, gotta be honest, recently it's been revealed that over a decade ago, I held many beliefs. Over a decade ago. Now, I don't know, like he doesn't really talk about his age, I don't think publicly too much, but this guy's 37, so he's older than me, okay? Over a decade ago, we're talking about 2008 up to 2012, maybe 2013, maybe even 2014, who knows? But up until that age, right, he was writing, and he's older than me. And I remember in 2012, I was turning 25, and I had just finished my first novel. It's an excellent novel, by the way. You could actually find it on Amazon. Alex Sharamet, A Few Streets More to Kensington. You could also find it on the automachination.com website. You see a link to it there directly. But that's what I was doing, right? I was actually like finessing the person that would later become my core self. I'm still a writer now. That core self was actually formulated then. 2012, I was turning 25. 2013, I was turning 26, second novel. A few months after that, a huge book of film criticism that you could also buy. That was my core self. I can't go back and say, because it was 2012 and 2013, that doesn't really matter so much. No, it does matter. It matters a lot. And I think it's very telling. Again, just think about this in terms of pathologies. When I was putting those finishing touches on my personality and myself and my talents, he was spending his free time on random message boards and neo-Nazi hangouts, just talking shit about black people, right? About women, right? He was not a child. He was older than me. Right? He could have been also working on a novel. He could have been doing actual good, important work. He could have been doing something worthwhile. He chose not to do that. The reason why he chose not to do it is because on some level, right, in deterministic fashion, if you're a determinist, it was kind of in him from the beginning, and that's the direction that he went based on his circumstances, based on his surroundings, based on the people that he was with, based on his romantic failures, based on the fact that he was morbidly obese. He says now that he yo-yos between 160 and 210 pounds. I find a little bit of empathy there and sympathy also in my mind, because I'm guessing he's around my height. I'm 5'8". I used to be actually over 210. I was around 220, right? And I lost that weight and I kept it off. So I understand the kinds of feelings of like self-hatred that goes along with being really fat and, not, really getting out of life what you want, not being able to control yourself. The fact that from the very beginning, the first paragraph, we have an obvious lie, and also this like papering over of actual reality, how time works, right? Again, he was totally an adult. Already from the beginning, this is going to really go off the rails. My posts and blog comments in my early 20s encouraged racism, misogyny, misanthropy, trolling, and overall bad faith. They actually still do, Richard. Phrases like racism and misogyny get thrown around too easily, I agree, but I don't believe there's any doubt many of my previous comments cross the line, regardless of where one thinks that line should be. Okay, just from a writerly perspective, like, this is just such terrible hacky writing, right? I mean, this is a guy that he calls himself an intellectual and a writer. Just listen to the logic of the sentence. There's no doubt many of my previous comments cross the line, regardless of where one thinks that line should be. Now, look, if you believe that line should be, it's perfectly acceptable to say that women should not have the right to vote. Black people are inferior to white people. It is perfectly acceptable then to have those beliefs, right? Because you're not crossing that line. You're still behind that line. So just even from a purely kind of like sentence by sentence basis, this guy just totally sucks, right? We have this really like HR kind of like bullshit lib speak here, as well as on Twitter, right? We have dishonesty here that is just very obvious if you just look at his Twitter feed. You have, you know, bad illogical writing all the way here. So just in terms of craft, right? If you want to think about why was he so insecure? Why was he so pathological? Why did he have all this self-hatred? It could be because, you know, he maybe believed from the very start that he didn't really have the talents that he thought that he deserved. There's this kind of like funny thing, like both in his kind of like Richard Haas alias, as well as more recently, or like in the last couple of years, right? He would tell these stories about, you know, when I was in high school and I was in, and I was trying to find like different kinds of work. He was like working at a pizzeria. He was working at McDonald's, and he was saying that his IQ was too high to be able to do that work well, right? He was complaining about the fact that every one of his colleagues, they absolutely hated him because he would always like fuck it up, right? He would always fuck up the line. Now, to a normal person that is not just like an outright narcissist, they would look at that situation, they would tell themselves, you know what? I'm kind of incompetent here. Maybe it's because there's something going on with me, like mentally. Maybe it's because I feel like I deserve something better. But really, you know, I am in a job. Other people need to be able to do a job. I can't fuck it up for them too. I need to really get with the program quickly and learn how to do it. Like, I do not believe that Hanania, if he really put his mind to it, I don't believe that he would totally suck at being a line cook, right? Or taking somebody's orders at McDonald's or working at a pizzeria. It's just his sense of entitlement. And again, he's not a good writer. We could tell that already. So the thing that he's working on the most, the thing that he said really kind of like turned his mind around and allowed him to like not be so hateful and allowed him to be different. Well, it's actually based on this very shaky edifice, right? He's starting from the assumption that he has talents, and clearly he does not. Below, I'll offer an explanation for why I wrote such things and why I no longer hold such views, but first it's important to discuss the nature of the recent journalistic attack. Right, so already he's calling it an attack. It's not an attack. My initial instinct was to either ignore the story or simply denounce the source and its methods. All right, now talking of pathology and delusions, like, isn't this delusional? Right, he's posting on websites that are denying the Holocaust. He's posting things like black people are inferior to white people. He's posting that women should not have the right to vote. And his initial instinct is to just assume that, you know what, it'll just blow over. Now, there's something to that a little bit in the sense that Twitter, you know, has been siloed off for a long time, right? There's different, you know, echo chambers even within Twitter. But he slowly, especially since Musk came to the fore, Hanania or Hanania, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, he's been cultivating a truly like batshit right-wing audience, even if this piece that he tweeted out doing this apology tour. You have all these people tweeting underneath him, essentially saying stuff like, what are you apologizing for, right? I've been a subscriber. Like, you see some of these people with the purple, like, you know, subscriber or like super, like whatever it is, like super, like a fan, or like, I don't even know what it's called. It's all these people that are just like saying like why are you apologizing? Well, you said it was good. Well, you said it was fine. Well, you said it was appropriate. What you said was not crossing the line, right? Which is, again, to go back to this idea, right? A lot of his fans actually would put that line a lot further than what he publicly claims it ought to be. So already here, like there's something wrong with this guy mentally, right? He thinks it's just going to blow over. He thinks that, he's working for Barry Weiss, right, who's Jewish, and he's supposed to be teaching one of the forbidden courses. And he thinks, like, let me just not talk about it. It's going to blow over, right? Just totally just add a touch, right? Is it simply because now he has so many followers, he feels like he's untouchable, right? There's certain things, Hanania, host, there's certain things I think he's going to figure out that you just can't say, especially in America. The journalist behind the piece is supportive of Antifa. Okay, now, so he's talking about hit pieces, and he's talking about all the problems with these like journalistic attacks, and he's like starting with that, right? He's a supporter of Antifa. He's a Democrat. He's a Republican. He's a socialist. He's a Green. He's Antifa. And in the days before publishing his article, he reached out to everyone he could think of to try and get them to cut ties with me. Sensing what was going on, nobody took the bait. He's now leading a mob on Twitter and telling people to watch for the fallout while tagging those in a position to hurt my career. Now, look, I do find a lot of this kind of stuff like pretty disgusting. At the same time, when I find this kind of stuff disgusting, it's married to a wider critique of capitalism. I have not seen a robust critique of capitalism from Hanania or Host or Haast, for that matter. Right? None of those four figures, none of them have had a robust critique of capitalism. So without that, you're not going to get my sympathy, right, when the mob is after you. I think he and his followers will continue to be disappointed. Maybe not. We'll see. People know that what I think is reflected in my corpus of work over the last several years rather than embarrassing takes in my early 20s, not early 20s, mid-20s, and even late 20s, especially since he's older than me. I was 26 almost when I did my second novel. So during that time in 2013, he must have been turning 27. Okay, this kind of like, it's just, and this is another thing, right? He's so first he's saying that he's not fixated on the whole like woke, anti-woke kind of woke dichotomy, right? He finds it silly. And yet he's so obsessed with culture wars. He's like constantly talking about trans stuff, and anybody that is like so fixated on this shit, right? I think it's also kind of pathological and telling. When you look at Hanania's comments about his like life growing up, the bullying that he experienced, I think there is like a non-zero chance that he got fucked up at some point by some, black kid that he was in school with. Maybe he got punched in the nose. And, there's a non-zero chance that he had this kind of like negative interaction. And I think there's a non-zero chance that he's never dealt with the fact that, when it comes to like masculinity, right? Especially if you're living in a suburb, it's a little bit different. If you're living in a city, it's a little bit different. But he's never had to actually deal with like high stakes masculinity. He's not comfortable with it. So he's so transfixed by trans issues and trans culture wars. He does not know who he really is. Like he can't be a man even in his apology. Right? Well, first of all, like the whole thing about like a real man knows how to apologize. Well, yes, this is true. A real man should know when to apologize, but also at the same time, let's add a little caveat to that. A real man also will think before he speaks, right? So this whole thing, like I'm just gonna like completely go nuts, say whatever the fuck I want to say, and then I'm gonna apologize afterwards, and it's all good, and they better accept it because that's what a man does. No. There's two parts to it, and the apology so far is not going very well. He seems to have not dealt with this like lifelong bullying. If he's still yo-yoing between 160 and 210 pounds, that's the fascinating part, right? And his like Richard Hosta alias, he keeps talking about the fact that, like people that are obese, right? There's this kind of like personal deficiency. They're disgusting not only on the outside, but also on the inside, which by the way, I mean, there's something to that, right? In terms of like, he's calling it personality traits. Like, again, when I was morbidly obese, it's because like there's like an emotional deficiency. There's problems going on. If you can't deal with those problems, you're gonna eat, or you're gonna develop some other kind of addiction. For his, for his level of addiction, right? He might talk shit about junkies, or he might talk shit about people that have like sort of like criminal pathologies. But the fact is, it's like, well, he's just picking and choosing what it is, right? His own pathology, in some ways is just as additive to kind of the sum total of what we're going through in this country. Like we're talking about obesity, we're talking about health epidemics. I mean, like even like look at his face now. Like I'm not one to like really talk about people's appearances, but honestly, given the fact that he constantly talks about people's appearances, both implicitly and explicitly, this guy, like look, He's so dripping in estrogen. Look at his face. Look how puffy it is. Look how babyish it is. Just the way that he's dealing with this apology, right? You could sort of tell. And I'm not even criticizing effeminate traits, right? I have plenty of effeminate traits, right? I grew up in a household that was like, with the exception of my brother, that was like all women, grandmother, great grandmother, mother, right? Always women, 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 right? Definitely growing up, I would develop some effeminate traits. There's nothing wrong with that, especially when you're able to sublimate them to something greater, right? The fact that I had the effeminate traits growing up, I really do think it played a big role in me essentially later on, like just becoming an artist, right? So I very much value that. He has like a very bitchy kind of like little, snippy kind of bitchy kind of thing going on, like as if he was also just raised all by women. He's definitely a guy that is so disappointed in his own manhood. He does not know where he fits in as a man. He doesn't know whether he should have been born a man, born a woman. He doesn't know if he would have had a better life, either or. He doesn't know where he is now. The whole obsession, the fixation of the black males and the kind of like fear narratives that he has about all that. Like when he said that black males are committing pogroms against whites in the inner city, that is somebody that has absolutely never, ever, ever lived in a black neighborhood, has never walked down a street full of black people. Now, listen to this shit. 15 years is long enough to graduate junior high, go through all of high school and college, earn a PhD, and get a third of the way towards being a tenured professor. If that's not long enough time to be beyond the statute of limitations for holding repugnant views one later renounces, then there's really no hope for us ever moving beyond cancel culture. Now look, I got issues with cancel culture. Even Hanania, I don't think he should be like, I don't think his book should be canceled or anything like that. Even if I don't believe it should be canceled in that way, he clearly does not deserve a book out there. He clearly does not deserve to be a writer and making money off of his writing. Because even here, look how disingenuous this is. 15 years is long enough to graduate junior high, go through all of high school. Look at, he thinks that he's slick, right? He's so much of a hack writer, dealing with admittedly many, much worse hack writers. Like his writing is not worse than, for example, like the typical HuffPost piece you remember during like 2015, 2016, 2013, all that shit, right? At the same time, he's not talented enough to know that, hey, look, like, I think that I'm being slick, but anybody with like a little bit of intelligence will actually see right through it. 15 years is long enough. And he decides to begin this in junior high, as if he's starting in junior high with this shit. No, let's start at the end point. The 15-year end point ends where? It ends in his 20s, okay? He's putting this into your head, junior high, to get you into the mindset of, what was I like when I was in junior high? Well, I was often a piece of shit when I was in junior high, biologically speaking, right? You're going through puberty. You're trying to find a way to fit in. You're going to bully people, right? You're going to fuck around. Maybe you're going to commit some crimes. Maybe you're going to join a gang, right? You do a lot of shit in junior high. I remember I was teaching kids in the junior high. I was going to court with some of these kids in junior high because they were bangers by the time that they were 12 years old. So you do a lot of fucked up shit in junior high, and that's perfectly fine. You grow out of that. But we're not talking about that here. He's saying this shit when he's 25, 24, 26, maybe even 27 years old. When I was getting married, and he's older than me, when I was getting married, he was an incel, saying that women shouldn't vote. When I was getting married and writing my first book, my second book, my third book, he was posting on goddamn message boards. And he's trying to present this not as it was. He's trying to bring you back into junior high. All right, some insight into how these people operate. Huffington Post asked me to comment, and practically every question was along the lines of, does your previous employer know? How about your academic affiliations, etc.? It's not about informing the reader or trying to bring understanding about something happening in the world. The entire journalistic endeavor revolves around the goal of unpersoning. This is true, right? But again, if you really, like, this is another thing, like, I have a robust critique of capitalism. I have a robust critique of cancel culture. At the same time, I can't quite bring myself to say that there should not be social stigma, right? right? Because again, right, Hanania, as a race realist and as someone that takes biology, human biology seriously, someone that does not believe in the blank slate, there's very, very good reason why social stigma exists. And you should not, in every single situation, get rid of it. I mean, he even said this about himself, like, I lost weight because I was bullied. Okay, well, he must support some form of social stigma. So I wonder, like, why exactly is this specifically the social stigma that he, to go back to that unfortunate phrase that he used before, why is this where he draws the line? Why? Does he have a robust answer? Or is it all kind of personal? Is it all narcissistic, right? Is it all, this is simply what's good for me, right? Is it just all about that? While those hoping for a cancellation are not worth engaging, well, no, they are worth engaging because they believe what you believe, which is social stigma. You believe in social stigma. This is a form of social stigma. You need to engage with that in some way, buddy. I do think that I owe my readers an explanation of how it came to the positions that I want to tell. All right, so he owes his actual preformed fan base, right? Again, he's against echo chambers and echo bubbles. But again, as he's cultivating race realism in his Twitter following, he's cultivating an echo chamber just based on the same here. Like, he's so fucking hacky, isn't he? Isn't this just such bad writing? So contradictory, so full of assumptions that are not teased out. I mean, this is Substack. He can make the shit as long as he wants. And he chooses to not, like, really develop any kind of thought whatsoever. This isn't simply about my own personal journey. Oh my goodness. We're back to this girly language, HR speak, right? These are like Oprah level cliches, my own personal journey. And this guy is a writer. The revelation of my anonymous writing clears up what some consider a mystery, which is why such a large portion of my current work involves attacking right-wing collectivism and illiberal beliefs. The truth is that part of it is self-loathing towards my previous life. I also clearly notice the kind of sloppy thinking, emotional immaturity, and moral shortcomings that can lead one to adopt a quasi-fascist ideology. All right, he's saying right now what we need to do to deal with crime is black people are not going to like it. White people don't have a stomach for it, but we need to incarcerate as many black people as possible. He said this shit like what? Like in the last few months he said shit like that. Quasi-fascist ideology in the past. So he's employing a regressive tax on black Americans now through incarceration. Through, let's not actually deal with any underlying problems, right? We're just going to moralize from you from the mountaintop. When I try to reconstruct my emotional status and reasoning of 12 to 15 years ago, a few things stand out. First, there was a desire to just adopt a posture that was the polar opposite of those I considered political enemies. Now, this is a really bad look, right? Because even, I remember in my high school years, I was a total Marxist. But even as a Marxist, that Leninist streak got cooked out of me really fast. I was like, you know what? There's something really fishy about Leninism. If there's going to be any kind of socialism or communism in the future, it's not going to look like a Leninist model. So immediately, right, I was like a little bit of heterodox, like even within like whatever the niche Marxism community. And then within this niche Marxism community, like I would argue with people about art, right? Because at the time I was getting really into poetry, I was really getting into novels, and I saw they would boost like bad like class consciousness type of like, you know, socialist realism like type of writing or whatever, and I would argue with them because it was like, no, look, like we could be Marxists, but like we don't have to be brain dead about it. We don't have to accept bad art simply because it sort of tickles our personal fancies about the class struggle or whatnot, right? But it seems like here's a guy who, again, we're not talking about, he's not 15 years old, okay? He's not 16 years old. But as a 22, 23, 24, potentially 27-year-old, he's just this like knee-jerk contrarian. So if liberals lied a lot about race, I needed to speak hard truths without much careful thinking about whether I was actually getting at a truth or simply being similarly dogmatic. Now look, again, I could imagine if you're a teenager, this is a man in his 20s, knee-jerk shit. There's something really off about this guy. I've told you this. Even before all this came out, I told you this. If they denied the overwhelming evidence in favor of heredity being important for individual outcomes, then I had to be a caricature of a genetic determinist. They required PC speak, so my tone, of course, needed to be as offensive as possible. Well, look, the problem with PC speak is not simply that it's inoffensive. It's the fact that it's cliche after cliche after cliche. He does not understand that, right? He doesn't understand that PC speak is simply a distortion of not only reality, but it's a distortion of craft. If you love craft, if you're very loving, right, about how you formulate your sentences, if this is what you're into, you're going to be so disgusted by PC shit, even if you accept the underlying politics. Okay, but he has not figured that out even now, even as a 37-year-old man, right? Even as a 37-year-old man on birth control, he still has not figured this out. They required PC speak, so my tone, of course, needed to be as offensive as possible. It's really that stupid, and think about my own history has made me extra sensitive towards noticing the flaws of others who seem to reason in a similar way. I generally hate when people play the mental illness card, in part because it's too easy and also because I don't like the language and heuristics that generally accompany such discussions. That said, it would be dishonest to pretend like my thinking has always been purely the result of dispassionate analysis. No shit. It's still to this day now the result of dispassionate analysis. Case in point, he has never been in a black neighborhood. He's never walked down a black street, so he could sit around and tell you shit like there's pogroms against white people going on in black neighborhoods. Around 2008, I had few friends or romantic successes and no real career prospects. Naturally, this led me to look around and come to the only logical conclusion, which was that I was naturally superior to everyone else and women in particular. He still believes that. 2021, he got tweets. My IQ was too high to work at a pizzeria and at McDonald's. That's why I stuck to those jobs. He still is doing these coping mechanisms. This is so dishonest. It's so girly. It's so effeminate in the worst ways. Recently, I argued against anonymity in writing about political and social issues. Again, this was a veiled form of self-criticism. People imagine anonymous personalities enriching the discourse by putting forth unpopular arguments that would otherwise be ignored. Although that sometimes happens, the vast majority of the time, being anonymous gives individuals a license to be a lot more extreme and uncivil. When I was writing anonymously, there was no connection between the flesh and the blood of a human being who would smile at a cashier or honk at someone in traffic, and the internet personality who could just grow more rabid over time, secure in the belief that nothing but the lulz mattered because the internet was the place where we just went to have fun. He did this shit with Jordan Neely. That's what he said to Jordan Neely. He's doing that shit to Jordan Neely to this day. To this day, he has not deleted those tweets. That's how he feels to this day. He's still in it for the lulz. He's still doing it behind an internet fucking screen. If he was on that train, he wouldn't have done shit. So yes, I truly sucked back then as far as my intellectual journey. I've come to firmly believe in classical liberalism due to a process of elimination as much as anything else since I've started paying attention to politics. We've seen Iraq, the financial crisis, the rise and fall of ISIS, the continuing growth of China, the increasing relevance of social media, the Great Awakening, the Trump movement, COVID-19, and now the Ukraine war. Speaking of COVID-19, go back. Like, look, this guy is just so stupid. I mean, he should not be anywhere near a computer, any kind of writing instruments. He really should be doing manual labor. And again, there's nothing wrong with manual labor. But if he would be doing manual labor, he would actually be providing a genuine service to the world. We need manual laborers. We don't need bad fucking writers. We don't. We don't need dumbasses putting out more dumbass takes. We don't need that. We just don't. Look what he's saying about mask wearers. The people I see most commonly now wearing masks are the homeless, often on the street with no one around them. It's sort of become what the tinfoil hat was to a previous generation. Well, first of all, I mean, like, I can understand that he would feel this way, but personally, since I need to use my brain, and also I'm aware of all the studies that show that even if you are vaccinated and you catch COVID, and even if it feels like a benign infection that just feels like a little cold that you'd never think about again, your brain might shrink by 2% and you won't even notice it until you have early onset dementia or until some other shit happens. You might think you're perfectly fine because all I had was a few sniffles and a little dry cough for a couple of days. It was no biggie. A few months later, you got a blood clot. A few months later, you got a stroke. A few months later, you got a heart attack. Or maybe it's not a few months later. Maybe you catch COVID a second time, or a third time, or a fourth time, because why the fuck would you mask, right? If you were supposed to live to be 85 years old, maybe you're going to live to be 80 or 75 or 70. Who knows? But he's not thinking about this kind of shit. Like, he's just not. I doubt that he's aware of these studies. He's too lazy to actually do any real fucking work. He's too lazy to even write an apology that makes any kind of sense. It's not just like contradicting itself. So he just says dumb shit again and again. He should be a manual laborer. He should work at a fucking pizzeria. He should be a line cook somewhere. He would be doing an objective service to the world. This is not an objective service to the world. The more I looked at the data, the more I became convinced that liberalism simply worked. Steven Pinker's books of the last decade are irrefutable on this point. Nonetheless, many pundits and intellectuals continue, and that's another thing. I mean, like, I have a lot of positive things to say about Pinker, but also a lot of negative things to say. He seems like he does not have any nuance whatsoever in his brain. I'm convinced that most of them are just projecting their personal unhappiness onto the rest of the world. No shit. Right? And their personal fears. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying about this guy. Just as I once did. Ooh, so dishonest. I can understand seeing flaws in the modern West, but I can no longer comprehend looking at any other alternative and thinking it's likely to be better. Well, I mean, you're always going to go at the pace of the West, right? Simply because, I mean, this is the West was in so many senses predetermined. Like if you read books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, like they were predetermined to essentially be, you know, the ones that would be the successors. Their model is going to be the model that's going to win out, right? I mean, there's no kind of like real alternative to this. Other writers have shifted my views on specific issues. Brian Kaplan and Alex Narasta have convincingly argued that even if groups differ in skills or cognitive abilities, we can still all benefit from the division of labor. If the worry is that migrants might vote for socialism or commit crimes, then the answer is not to exclude people from society or otherwise discriminate against them based on group averages. And this whole like commit crimes, first of all, I don't know exactly what the data is about migrants and committing crimes, but it's like, if you're a migrant and you're here to be like a, you know, physical laborer, you know, somebody that's actually providing a service to the world, you're probably not going to be committing crimes at the rate of other people. And you're especially not going to be committing really the most consequential crimes, right? Murder is what, 20,000 people or so at best in America, 20 to 25,000 every single year. The lack of universal health coverage, that is tens of thousands just by itself. When you start really seeing how these things multiply, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, we're talking about millions of people that are dead. Wage theft versus being mugged. How many times does a guy with a gun in the projects have to mug somebody to, you know, make the amount of money that a single guy that is just kind of like so ensconced in the tax code where he could do whatever that he wants essentially. No one's going to come after him because it's all above board, right? All of that, right? Like people don't really understand that when it comes to street crime, it's a regressive tax in so many ways, but it's also a regressive tax upon the criminal himself, right? Because if you're a street criminal, what that means is the crimes that are available to you are simply different from other kinds of crimes available to other kinds of demographics. If you're a street criminal and you're going to mug somebody, like at best, what? You're going to like steal somebody's iPhone or some shit. At worst, you're going to take what, $20 from them? $40 from them? Maybe a debit card? Maybe a credit card that they cancel after the fact. And in exchange, you have the possibility of A, getting your own brains blown out, B, killing somebody and going to prison for the rest of your life. That's a very, very sort of bad situation to be in. Of course, criminality as it exists is going to be much more common in not the black world, not in migrants, but everybody else, right? That gets to engage in the kinds of crimes where the risk to them is much lower and the payoff is much, much higher. But again, he's not thinking about that because he's not actually from the real world. The reason that we can't do this is because of concerns over disparate impact, a cancerous idea. What are you talking about? How is it a cancerous idea? If you have disparate impact, this is another thing, again, just ordinary logic, right? If you have disparate impact and you have something like, okay, we're going to come down really, really hard on black males. If you multiply the 2 million incarcerated to 4 million or 6 million or 8 million or 10 million, guess what happens? Here's the guy that claims to understand something about human biology and sexual dimorphism. What happens? All those black males that would have been eligible bachelors, they don't exist anymore. So females, they have to deal with the leftovers. And many of the leftovers, guess what? They're going to be the most putrid fucking guys. And you know why they're going to be putrid? Because the sexual default in that scenario is going to be to the sexual preferences of the male. And if the male feels, well, look, I'm so outnumbered by women, I can treat them how I want. I could demand what I want. You're creating these same obstacles through that disparate impact. All these things that you see are lesions in the black community, pathologies in the black community. If this is what you believe, a black child born to a household like this begins with these obstacles. It means that 1,000 black children with 1,000 similar obstacles, they are by definition, you roll that probability space again and again, they're not going to get ahead again and again and again compared to white groups or Jewish groups or Asians, because the beginning obstacles look so different. And if you put those same obstacles in any other community, white, black, it doesn't matter. They're going to look the same. Okay, let's read the final part. Since I sucked so much a decade ago, it's fair to ask whether I still suck today. In certain ways, yes. I just told you that I see myself in many anonymous writers and Twitter accounts, and instead of that eliciting sympathy, I just write them off as hopeless cases. Okay, now we begin with dishonesty in this little essay, and we end with dishonesty. Look at this humble brag. He's trying to present this as a negative, right? As a vice. This is one of Richard Hanania's vices that he's trying to get over. He sees all these anonymous writers and trolls and Twitter users, his own fan base, the majority of his own fucking fan base. Just look what goes on under these Twitter threads that he releases. Look what people are saying. Look what his fans say. And he's trying to tell you that my vice right now is that all these trolls below my Twitter threads, I just dismiss them. When in fact, he's just trying to tell you that, hey, look, I'm actually good. I'm the good guy. I'm not a bad guy. Please don't cancel me. Please, 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 please. I'm different from them, right? They're not like me anymore. I am so psychologically advanced at this point that I don't even recognize that group anymore. And it makes me less empathetic. It makes me less sympathetic. That's what he's trying to, that's all it is. This whole thing is just a goddamn lie. It's so girly. It's so effeminate. It's absolutely not manly. I really think there is something to the conservative idea of masculinity in crisis. I do think there's a crisis. But the crisis is not what they say it is. And the crisis is not what their recommendations are to quell and to resolve that crisis. It's not. But I think there's something to it. When you talk about a crisis of masculinity, it's this. It's guys that look like this. It's guys that talk all this shit on Twitter. You get them on a fucking YouTube channel, and they talk like little girls. It's a conservative crisis as much as it's a liberal crisis. Liberals don't want to deal. It's true. He's correct when he says liberals don't want to deal with things like blank slatism. They don't want to deal with sexual dimorphism. They don't want to deal with the innate differences between men and women, both in terms of just like pure physicality as well as psychologically and all the entailments that this creates. They don't want to deal with it. But their solutions to that, they're so repugnant. And they come from the most like to take like any kind of sexual or masculinity or whatever advice from a fucking dork like this is just pathetic. This whole thing, this whole apology tour, right? The apology tour starts with PR speak. It starts with HR speak, and it ends that way, and it's dripping all throughout. And it's especially pathetic because all throughout he's trying to present himself as so heterodox, so different, and it's not.